Winter wind tears through the Chicago rail yards, carrying the metallic stench of pig iron and coal smoke across acres of frozen mud. It's 1908, and beneath the elevated tracks where immigrant families huddle in tenement shadows, a different kind of economy is being born. Not the legitimate world of stockyard wages and factory shifts, but something darker, more resilient, woven into the very fabric of a city exploding with ambition and chaos. The old country brought traditions to these New World streets: honor, loyalty, and vengeance. But it also brought something else, a parasitic system of terror that would metastasize into America's most durable criminal empire. They called the early extortionists Black Hand operators, independent predators who thrived on fear. Letters arrived at Italian grocers and saloon owners, crude threats scrawled in broken English, demanding payments of $500, sometimes $1,000. Refusal meant fire. It meant kidnapping. It meant bodies discovered in alleys with throats opened like butchered livestock. Chicago police rarely investigated these crimes. The victims spoke broken English, lived in districts the authorities deemed expendable, and even when they dared to report extortion, they faced a wall of indifference. Corruption was already endemic. Beat cops took payoffs to look away. Precinct captains protected gambling dens and brothels. The city's political machine, controlled by aldermen like Bathhouse John Coughlin and Michael Hinky Dink Kinna, treated vice as a revenue stream, not a crime. Into this volatile landscape arrived a figure who would transform fragmented chaos into industrial-scale criminality. Johnny Torrio stepped off a train from Brooklyn in 1909, a quiet man with clear eyes and an accountant's mind. Unlike the violent enforcers who dominated Chicago's criminal underworld, Torrio believed in systems, in organizational charts, in the principle that violence should serve profit, not ego. He had been summoned by his cousin, Victoria Moresco, who operated a chain of brothels on the South Side. She needed help. Her business partner, James Big Jim Colosimo, controlled the city's prostitution rackets but faced relentless Black Hand threats. Torrio's solution was surgical. He identified the extortionists, negotiated when possible, and eliminated those who refused to negotiate. Within months, the Black Hand threats against Colosimo's operations ceased. But Torrio saw something Colosimo didn't. Chicago's vice economy was fragmented, dozens of independent operators competing for territory, undercutting prices, sparking turf wars that attracted unwanted police attention. Torrio proposed consolidation, a centralized organization that would control brothels, gambling halls, and saloons across multiple districts, paying protection to politicians and police in exchange for immunity. Colosimo, flush with cash from his existing operations, agreed to expand. Under Torrio's guidance, the South Side became a model of organized vice. Brothels operated on schedules. Gamblers paid percentages to a central treasury. Politicians received envelopes on the first of every month. The system worked because Torrio understood leverage. He placed allies inside ward political machines, ensured favorable police assignments, and maintained meticulous records of every transaction. Everything was business. Everything had a price. But Colosimo's appetite for risk had limits. As the 1910s progressed, Torrio saw the future approaching like a freight train. Prohibition was coming. Temperance movements had gained unstoppable momentum across the country, and when the Volstead Act passed in 1919, Torrio recognized it as the greatest business opportunity in American history. Alcohol wouldn't disappear. Demand would skyrocket. Prices would explode. And anyone controlling supply would become unimaginably wealthy. Colosimo refused. He was content with prostitution and gambling, unwilling to antagonize federal authorities by trafficking illegal liquor. The disagreement created an irreparable fracture. On May 11, 1920, Big Jim Colosimo entered the foyer of his restaurant on South Wabash. A gunman, waiting in shadow, fired a single shot. Colosimo collapsed, dead before his body settled on the marble floor. The killer vanished. Police investigated, but found no evidence. Torrio expressed shock and grief at his mentor's murder. Yet within days, he had consolidated control over Colosimo's entire empire and began converting warehouses into beer distribution centers. He also sent word to Brooklyn, telling an old associate to dispatch a young enforcer who needed to disappear for a while. The man who arrived in Chicago that autumn was 21 years old, thick-bodied, with scars across his left cheek from a knife fight. His name was Alphonse Capone. Torrio installed him as manager of the Four Deuces, a South Wabash nightclub that served as headquarters, casino, brothel, and command center. Capone's role was operational: manage deliveries, collect payments, intimidate competition. But Torrio also recognized potential. Capone was brutal when necessary, but he had charm, charisma, and an instinct for publicity that Torrio lacked. The empire Torrio built during Prohibition's first years was staggering in scope. He established supply lines from Canada and downstate Illinois distilleries, smuggling operations across Lake Michigan, and a distribution network spanning hundreds of speakeasies. Trucks rolled nightly through Chicago streets, their cargo concealed beneath false floors. Federal agents were bribed. Coast Guard patrols looked the other way. The profits were astronomical. A barrel of beer that cost $15 to produce sold for $50 wholesale and $200 retail. Multiply that across thousands of barrels weekly, and Torrio's organization generated revenues exceeding legitimate corporations. But Prohibition's gold rush attracted predators. On the north side, a coalition of Irish gangsters led by Dean O'Banion controlled their own distribution network. O'Banion was flamboyant, reckless, and contemptuous of Torrio's attempts at territorial compromise. When O'Banion hijacked a shipment of Torrio's beer, then sold him a share in a brewery Torrio knew was about to be raided by police, the insult was unforgivable. On November 10, 1924, 3 men entered Schofield's flower shop, O'Banion's legitimate front business. They shook his hand. Then they shot him 6 times. The North Side Gang vowed vengeance. What followed was Chicago's bloodiest gang war. Drive-by shootings became routine. Ambushes turned intersections into kill zones. On January 24, 1925, as Torrio returned to his apartment, North Side gunmen opened fire. Bullets tore through his jaw, chest, and abdomen. Capone rushed him to the hospital, likely saving his life. But as Torrio recovered, staring at the hospital ceiling, he made a decision that would reshape American organized crime. He summoned Capone to his bedside and spoke through bandages. "It's yours. Take it. I'm done." Johnny Torrio, the architect of modern organized crime, retired at 43. He moved to Brooklyn, then Italy, living quietly for decades. He never served significant prison time. He never faced a major federal indictment. He simply disappeared, leaving behind a blueprint that would endure for generations. Al Capone inherited an empire, generating over $100 million annually, but he also inherited war. The North Side Gang, now led by Jaime Weiss and George Bugs Moran, intensified attacks. Capone responded with overwhelming force. He expanded operations into suburban Cicero, effectively purchasing an entire municipality through bribes, intimidation, and election fraud. Cicero became an autonomous zone where Capone's men operated with impunity. Gambling halls, brothels, and breweries ran 24 hours daily. When reform candidates tried to challenge Capone's control, they found their offices firebombed, their supporters beaten, their campaign workers murdered in broad daylight. Capone understood that power required visibility. Unlike Torrio's quiet efficiency, Capone cultivated a public persona. He wore expensive suits, tipped lavishly, attended operas and sporting events, and spoke to reporters with disarming candor. "I give people what they want," he famously declared. "Prohibition is a business. All I do is satisfy a public demand." The press called him Scarface, though never to his face. Photographers captured his smile, his diamond rings, his armored Cadillac cruising through downtown Chicago. He became America's most famous criminal, simultaneously feared and admired, a symbol of Prohibition's hypocrisy and excess. But visibility attracted enemies. Himmy Weiss led assassination attempts, including a 1926 ambush outside Capone's Cicero headquarters that left the building riddled with over 1,000 bullet holes. Capone survived, but the message was clear. The North Side would never surrender. Weiss himself was killed weeks later in a retaliatory strike. His successor, Bugs Moran, continued the war. Capone's response would become the most infamous moment in American crime history. February 14, 1929, a bitterly cold morning on North Clark Street. 7 members of Moran's gang gathered in a garage waiting for a shipment of hijacked whiskey. A police car pulled to the curb. 4 men stepped out, 2 in uniform, 2 in plainclothes. They entered the garage and ordered the gangsters to line up against the brick wall. What happened next lasted perhaps 30 seconds. The roar of Thompson's submachine guns shattered the morning silence. 70 rounds tore through flesh, bone, and brick. When the shooting stopped, 7 men lay dead or dying in spreading pools of blood. The killers calmly walked out, the uniformed men escorting the plainclothes gunmen as if making arrests, and drove away. The St. Valentine's Day massacre shocked the nation. Newspapers published graphic photographs. Editorials condemned Chicago as a war zone. Federal authorities, previously content to let local police handle bootleggers, began coordinating a national response. Capone was in Florida when the murders occurred, establishing an alibi. But everyone knew who had ordered it. The massacre didn't end Capone's reign. Business continued. Profits soared. But something had shifted. Public tolerance for gangland violence was evaporating. Reformers demanded action. The federal government, under pressure to demonstrate prohibition enforcement, made Capone their primary target. The Bureau of Prohibition assigned Elliot Ness to lead a hand-picked squad. Ness and his untouchables raided breweries, hijacked liquor shipments, and froze assets. But they couldn't find evidence linking Capone directly to bootlegging. Capone's organization had layers of insulation. Orders traveled verbally, payments moved through intermediaries. Legitimate businesses concealed illegal income. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Treasury agent Frank Wilson studied Capone's financial records, tracing his lavish spending, his real estate purchases, his luxury goods. Wilson discovered something obvious yet devastating. Capone had never filed income tax returns. The 16th Amendment, ratified in 1913, made all income taxable, including illegal proceeds. The Supreme Court confirmed this in 1927. Suddenly, Capone's wealth, the visible proof of his power, became evidence of federal crimes. On June 5, 1931, a grand jury indicted Capone on 22 counts of tax evasion. Capone's lawyers attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, but the judge refused. The trial proceeded through October, with prosecutors presenting meticulous documentation of Capone's income and expenditures. The defense had no counterargument. Capone couldn't claim poverty while wearing diamond jewelry. On October 17, 1931, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 5 counts. The judge sentenced Capone to 11 years in federal prison, the harshest sentence ever imposed for tax evasion. Capone served time in Atlanta, then transferred to Alcatraz when authorities worried about his continued influence. By then, the syphilis he had contracted years earlier was destroying his brain. Capone was released in 1939, mentally incapacitated, and died in 1947 at his Florida estate, a hollow shell of the man who had terrorized a city. But the organization he built didn't collapse, it evolved. As Capone entered prison, control passed to Frank Nitti, a ruthless enforcer who despised publicity. Under Nitti, the outfit, as it was now universally known, moved operations deeper underground. Speakeasies closed after Prohibition's repeal in 1933, but gambling, labor racketeering, and extortion expanded to fill the void. Nitti understood the lesson of Capone's downfall. Visibility invited prosecution. The outfit needed to become invisible. Nitti restructured operations around labor unions. Chicago was an industrial powerhouse, with hundreds of thousands of workers organized into unions controlling construction, trucking, manufacturing, and service industries. Through intimidation and bribery, the outfit infiltrated union leadership. Once installed, outfit representatives controlled hiring, negotiated contracts, and administered pension funds. The power was extraordinary. Construction projects required union labor. If developers didn't cooperate, strikes paralyzed work. Trucking companies couldn't operate without Teamster approval. If business owners refused payoffs, deliveries stopped. The outfit had discovered something more profitable than bootlegging. They controlled the city's economic infrastructure. Nitti also invested heavily in legitimate businesses, using shell companies to purchase restaurants, laundries, and distribution firms. Money laundering became systematized. Illegal profits flowed through clean businesses, emerging as taxable income from legitimate sources. Federal investigators struggled to trace ownership through layers of corporate fronts. But Nitti's reign was brief. In 1943, facing federal indictment for extorting Hollywood studios, Nitti shot himself rather than return to prison. Leadership passed to Paul Ricca, a Sicilian immigrant who had worked his way up from Chicago's Taylor Street. Ricca, nicknamed the Waiter for his early restaurant job, was everything Capone wasn't: quiet, methodical, invisible. Ricca shared power with Tony Accardo, a former Capone bodyguard whose strategic mind rivaled Ricca's. Together, they perfected the model Torrio had envisioned and Nitti had refined. Under Ricca and Accardo, the outfit became a shadow government. They held court not in palatial hotels, but in modest homes and social clubs. Orders traveled through coded conversations and trusted intermediaries. Violence decreased dramatically, reserved only for internal discipline or existential threats. The organization operated like a corporation, with territories, reporting structures, and profit-sharing arrangements. Their greatest innovation was Las Vegas. When Bugsy Siegel proposed building the Flamingo Hotel in the Nevada desert, Ricca and Accardo recognized the opportunity immediately. Legal gambling in Nevada could be infinitely more profitable than illegal gambling in Chicago. The outfit provided financing through loans from Teamster pension funds, money the union couldn't refuse to lend. In exchange, the outfit controlled the skim, the cash siphoned from casino counting rooms before reported to Nevada regulators. The operation was brilliantly simple. Every night, trusted couriers removed cash from casino profits. The money traveled to Chicago in suitcases, briefcases, and car trunks, completely unreported and untaxed. By the 1950s, the outfit was skimming millions annually from multiple Las Vegas casinos. Federal regulators knew skimming occurred but couldn't prove it. The couriers were trusted family members. The counting rooms had no surveillance cameras. The cash simply vanished. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the outfit's political influence reached unprecedented levels. Aldermen won elections with outfit money. Judges owed their appointments to outfit connections. Police commanders received promotions through outfit recommendations. The corruption was so pervasive it became structural, embedded in how the city functioned. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover publicly denied the Mafia's existence throughout the 1950s, focusing his agency's resources on communists rather than organized crime. Hoover's refusal to acknowledge reality gave the outfit nearly 2 decades of unimpeded growth. But cracks were forming. In 1950, Senator Estes Kefauver launched televised hearings on organized crime. For the first time, millions of Americans watched mobsters testify, claiming ignorance about criminal enterprises while clearly lying. The hearings exposed connections between organized crime and politics, triggering public outrage. Then, in 1957, police raided a meeting in Appalachian, New York, arresting dozens of Mafia leaders from across the country. The arrests demolished Hoover's denials. The Mafia was real, national, and powerful. Federal law enforcement finally began dedicating serious resources to organized crime investigations. Ricca retired in the early 1960s, leaving Accardo as sole leader. Accardo, now in his 50s, was possibly the most successful American mafia boss in history. He would lead the outfit for over 4 decades, never spending a single night in prison for a serious crime. His strategy was simple: stay invisible, avoid violence, and diversify investments. Under Accardo, the outfit expanded into suburban Chicago, infiltrating construction companies, waste management firms, and vending machine companies. Every business generated revenue while providing cover for money laundering. The organization's annual income was estimated at over $100 million, possibly much higher. Federal authorities couldn't accurately measure it. But Accardo faced new threats. In the 1960s, Attorney General Robert Kennedy made destroying organized crime a personal mission. Kennedy created federal strike forces, authorized wiretaps, and pressed for new legislation. The Department of Justice finally had tools to fight the mafia systematically. Wiretaps proved devastatingly effective. Conversations that mobsters believed were private suddenly appeared in court transcripts. Meetings held in supposedly secure locations were recorded. Investigators could finally connect orders to actions, linking bosses to street-level crimes. Prosecutions increased. In Chicago and other cities, significant figures faced racketeering charges. Some were convicted, some became informants. The outfit's insulation, so carefully constructed over decades, was eroding. The organization adapted again. Accardo decentralized operations, giving greater autonomy to street crews. Orders traveled through more intermediaries. Meetings occurred less frequently. The outfit's structure became more cellular, with each unit operating semi-independently. If one crew was compromised, the damage was contained. Through the 1970s and 1980s, the outfit remained formidable. They controlled labor unions, skimmed Las Vegas casinos, ran gambling operations across the Midwest, and maintained political influence in Chicago. But their power was diminishing. Las Vegas casinos, once mobster playgrounds, were being purchased by corporations. State gaming commissions scrutinized ownership more carefully. The skim became riskier. Labor union corruption remained profitable, but federal monitors were gradually cleaning up Teamster leadership. The outfit still controlled locals in Chicago, but their influence was contracting. And new criminal organizations, particularly street gangs involved in narcotics trafficking, were competing for territory and influence. The decisive blow came in the 1990s and 2000s through a landmark investigation called Operation Family Secrets. Federal investigators convinced Frank Calabrese Jr., son of a high-ranking outfit member, to wear a wire and record his father discussing unsolved murders. The recordings were devastating. For the first time, investigators had direct evidence linking current leadership to decades of violence. The 2007 trial resulted in multiple convictions, including murder conspiracy charges that sent outfit leaders to prison for life. The convictions decimated the organization's remaining structure. Younger members had little interest in the old hierarchies. The glory days, if they could be called that, were clearly over. Today, the Chicago outfit still exists, but as a shadow of its former self. Federal authorities estimate membership in the dozens rather than hundreds. The organization still generates income through gambling, loan sharking, and extortion, but the revenues are millions rather than hundreds of millions. The empire that Torrio built, that Capone expanded, that Ricca and Accardo perfected, has been reduced to scattered crews operating at the margins. Yet, the outfit's legacy endures. Chicago's political culture, its labor unions, its business practices, all bear marks of decades when organized crime was intertwined with legitimate institutions. Corruption that seemed normal for generations required decades to dismantle. Some argue it never fully disappeared, merely transformed. The outfit story offers lessons about power and adaptation. They succeeded not through superior violence, but through strategic thinking. Torrio understood organization. Capone understood publicity. Ricca and Accardo understood invisibility. Each generation learned from predecessors' mistakes, evolving to survive changing conditions. They also succeeded because institutions failed. Police corruption allowed them to operate openly. Political corruption gave them protection. Federal indifference provided decades of impunity. The outfit didn't conquer Chicago through strength alone. They filled a vacuum created by systemic dysfunction. Their downfall came when institutions finally functioned. Federal prosecutors who couldn't be bribed, judges who couldn't be intimidated, investigators who used technology to pierce secrecy. The same systems that enabled the outfit's rise eventually destroyed it. But that destruction took over 80 years. From Torrio's arrival in 1909 to the Family Secrets trial in 2007, the Chicago outfit operated continuously, adapting to Prohibition's rise and fall, surviving wars between rivals, outlasting reformers and prosecutors, transforming from street gang to corporate criminal enterprise. Their longevity was unprecedented in American organized crime. As dusk settles over Chicago now, the city looks nothing like the industrial jungle of 1908. The stockyards are gone, replaced by gentrified neighborhoods. The rail yards are parks. The tenements are condos. But beneath the surface, in quiet conversations and sealed records, the outfit's legacy persists, not as power, but as memory. A reminder that institutions are fragile, that corruption is insidious, and that organized crime succeeds when society allows it to. The empire that once ruled Chicago from shadow exists now only in testimony, in history books, in the fading memories of those who knew its power firsthand. The streets where Capone's motorcades once roared are now filled with tourists and commuters, unaware that beneath the pavement lies a century of buried secrets. And perhaps that's fitting. Empires built on violence and secrecy ultimately leave nothing permanent. They rise, dominate, and fade, defeated not by rivals, but by time itself, by the slow grinding of justice, by the inevitable evolution of societies that, however slowly, learn to resist corruption. The Chicago outfit ruled for nearly a century, but in the end, they proved what Torrio knew from the beginning. Power that depends on invisibility cannot last forever. Eventually, light finds every shadow. Eventually, every empire falls.